Hello, church and church friends. Here we are at the end of the 2019-2020 program year at the UU Church of Greater Lynn, and what a year it has been. You may find that you feel better in the summer, being able to be outdoors, and a lot of you garden, I know, and get more movement in. But a lot of us are also feeling really sad right now because the summer often represents freedom and travel and a lot of cultural outings. And of course, right now, the coronavirus continues to rage, and we have to stay really vigilant and really safe and careful. And I hope that you are doing okay and that you are also being safe and careful. And I grieve with you the loss of some of the things we really love about summer. We continued our formal worship services a little later into June than we usually do because we have this urgent call right now to engage in the work of anti-racism. I want to acknowledge that right now a lot of you are feeling overwhelmed with just coping with your own lives. And you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't add another thing. I hope this won't feel like another thing. I hope that you can incorporate some of what we are trying to learn and become just as best you can into your life. So maybe you feel like, oh, I can't read a whole book. Get the book. It's So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Alua. Get the book and read a couple chapters. It's okay. There will not be a test, but this is an effort we're trying to make. Maybe you can't do a 3-part workshop, but you could maybe read some of the notes that come out of it. Just reach out, let us know what you can do. And you may find, as I have found, even on my most depleted days when I think, oh, I can't look beyond just my own personal life, that engaging in this work, it gives you a lot of energy. It makes me feel connected with a beautiful kind of transformational spirit, and it feels like I have some power, some good power with other people on behalf of the good and the right and on the behalf of justice. So that could happen for you. If you are feeling depressed and anxious and overwhelmed by living cooped up with your family, or by the change in plans from what you envisioned as the summer of 2020, you're feeling touch-starved and trying to get through your days, please do reach out. One of the saddest false dichotomies that has ever been created is the sense that we are either activist congregations or we're spiritual congregations. There's no separation between the two. Just like there's not a huge universe of separation between science and religion. Religion poetically tries to explain reality, and science does that, through the scientific method. So we're not split into two. We're not spiritual beings and social justice beings. We are integrated. And so I hope this summer that we can live out of that integrated self that we all are. Whoever you are, however you are doing, whatever you feel capable of in this time, you are woven together in spirit with the great spirit of transformation that is moving among and within us always. I have faith in this, and I hope you do too. In that spirit, in that faith, do we light our chalice. The cup of healing and the fire of commitment. Come on now, fire, please. There we go. Please join me in affirming our covenant. Love is a doctrine of this church. The quest for truth, its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God. Our readings today are excerpts from the work of Ibram X. Kendi, whose books are very hot right now. And if you try to buy them, you might find that some of them are being reprinted, which is really exciting. It's really good news. One of the books is called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And the other from which I took these readings is called Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. What is the problem with being not racist? It is a claim that signifies neutrality. I'm not a racist, but neither am I aggressively against racism. But there is no neutrality in the racism struggle. The opposite of racist isn't not racist. It is anti-racist. Americans have long been trained to see the deficiencies of people rather than policy. It's a pretty easy mistake to make. People are in our faces. Policies are distant. We are particularly poor at seeing the policies lurking behind the struggles of people. The principal function of racist ideas in American history has been the suppression of resistance to racial discrimination and its resulting racial disparities. And I would add the violent suppression of resistance. The beneficiaries of slavery, segregation, and mass incarceration have produced racist ideas of Black people being best suited for or deserving of the confines of slavery, segregation, or the jail cell. Consumers of these racist ideas have been led to believe that there is something wrong with Black people and not the policies that have enslaved, oppressed, and confined so many Black people. Like fighting an addiction, being an anti-racist requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. And there ends the reading. But I want to add that Kendi's emphasis on the importance of self-examination in becoming anti-racist is what makes this a spiritual practice. Because we are constantly interrogating our own beliefs. And so that's what I want to invite us to do right now in response to these readings. Ask ourselves before God, before our own conscience, before our community, who am I? What have I been taught about my fellow human beings? What messages have I absorbed about Black people in particular, living where I do and living as I do? How did my formal education prepare me or not prepare me for becoming not just not racist, but anti-racist?
Good morning. I am Martha Curry of the Social Justice Ministry team. I hope you're all doing well. Some of you heard the sermon this past January at church, but given what our nation is going through and what our faith calls us to do, to stand on the side of love and justice at this moment, we thought it would be worthwhile for me to share it again. I hope that these reflections will encourage you to engage with our congregational anti-racism learning and action initiative. Given I, who only just mastered selfie photos, is recording this at home alone, is a testimony to how important this is to me personally. Forgive any technical or other issues, please. This past summer, in August 2019, the New York Times devoted its Sunday magazine to acknowledge the 400th anniversary of the first captured African people being sold to colonists in Virginia in 1619. It included many essays, including ones that touted the contributions made through the years by slaves and their descendants, and some hard-to-read details of slavery and race in the United States. In August of 1619, about 20 Africans, kidnapped by the Portuguese and destined for the Caribbean, were captured by pirates who then traded them for food and supplies from a colony in Virginia. And so began slavery in the United States. A year before the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth. There was plenty of slavery in what is now Europe and Africa in 1619, but it was never based on race, more on the origins of race in a bit, and the slaves were not thought of as chattel, as property to be worked hard or bought and sold. Old world slavery included captives from enemies in war, serfs, and indentured servants, but they were still considered human beings with some limited rights. People were also enslaved for a limited period of time to pay off a debt or pay for a crime. They were never considered property of others. American slavery changed from the old world practice to a race-based system, treating humans as chattel. Chattel is defined as any item of property except for real estate. Humans were used as collateral for loans to expand an owner's business, mortgage to allow owners to buy more human chattel, increasing the return on the investment in cotton or rice or other labor-intensive industries, generating in wealth and power for white owners. Chattel slavery was based on race was firmly established by laws in the colonies by the mid-1600s. It was based on assumptions that blacks were inferior and stripped them of their rights and respect and dignity. For the next few years, they tried to prove this as scientific fact. It was also based on the economic need for very cheap labor. About 10 years ago, I was on a family vacation in California, where we visited the Science Museum of UC Berkeley. We discovered an exhibit about race. I don't remember the details, but it confronted me, and I recognized I had believed up to that point that race had a biological basis. The exhibit convinced me otherwise, and I came to understand that race is a social construct designed to benefit the white race. Us versus them, haves versus have-nots. The exhibit later came to Boston, and we saw it again. I was so impressed with it that I called up the new high school principal here in Swampscott to try and convince him that every student should see this exhibit, to no avail. Just because race is not biologically based, it is still real. A social construct with explicit and implicit results. Racism, hard to see sometimes, exists in our institution and policies and still lingers with us today. Here are some key dates related to slavery. 1807, the international slave trade is banned, but slavery remains legal mostly in the southern states. 1850, The Compromise of 1850 included the Fugitive Slave Act. It required citizens to assist in the recovery of fugitive slaves. 1857, the Dred Scott decision ruled that descendants of slaves were not citizens. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order by President Abraham Lincoln. It changed the legal status from slave to free of more than 3.5 million enslaved African Americans in the Confederate States. An escaped slave just had to cross over the Union lines to be free. The remaining slaves, held outside the Confederacy, were freed later, either by state law or the 13th Amendment. 1865, the 13th Amendment banning slavery was ratified. 1868, the 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal civil and legal rights to African Americans and former slaves. 1869, the 15th Amendment states that a citizen's right to vote should not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. 1865 to 1877, Reconstruction. While I remember learning in history class that Reconstruction ultimately failed, something about carpetbaggers, the real and enduring legacy were the black codes and Jim Crow laws that rolled back some of the changes of the 13th and 14th Amendments. But Reconstruction's temporary success was perhaps a snapshot of our ideal selves. Blacks and whites were elected to state legislatures that wrote progressive state constitutions and established free public schools for whites and blacks in the South. Blacks were elected to Congress and held other positions. One of the tangible results of this tumultuous history is the wealth gap that exists even today between the races. How did this occur? Let's take a step back. How did America become the wealthiest nation in the world? How did the brand new country back in the 1700s pay off its war debt so quickly? The wealth of the colonies and subsequently of the United States was based on natural resource, and land, a plentiful resource, required hard labor to extract value. African slaves did the brutally hard work of clearing land, growing and picking cotton, rice, and sugarcane. We think today the global economy is new, but it was up and running centuries ago. At one point, cotton was the nation's most valuable commodity and major export. The U.S. was providing 2/3 of the world's cotton. To a large extent, the wealth of the nation was built on the backs of slaves. Wealth accrued to whites, but was denied to blacks. Since then, institutional programs and policies have continued to add to the wealth gap. In 2016, white families had a median net worth of $171,000, compared with $17,600 for blacks. While some whites have legacy wealth, a vast majority took advantage of programs in the 1900s, ostensibly for all, but in practice, mostly benefiting whites. The Federal Housing Authority, FHA, was set up in 1934 in part to assist people to buy homes, a common way to create wealth. It employed redlining, identifying neighborhoods and areas off limit due to supposed increased risk. What was the result? Most assistance went to whites, and blacks did not participate in the middle class growth last century. The GI Bill ended up benefiting many more whites due to school segregation and lack of black colleges. They got the benefit, but there was nowhere to go to school. And it is still happening today. For example, an innocent-looking rule or directive established in a manner that favors whites and not people of color. The work requirement established by some states for Medicaid recipients can be subject to waivers. Some states use waivers, and the rural poor, who tend to be white, are not required to work. The urban poor, overwhelmingly people of color, must meet the work requirement or lose health coverage. What can we do? I've gone to meetings and workshops on racism and racial justice, and I noticed the tenor of them is changing from a focus on people's personal feelings and personal bigotry, however unintended, to a focus on institutional racism, bigotry with power behind it. While we should continue to examine our personal prejudices, we need to take a hard look and understand institutional systemic racism. This is the learning that white Americans are being asked to do by Black Americans. And this is the learning we feel is crucial to our congregational mission and identity. One of the challenges of examining racism in diverse groups is that for people of color, sometimes the work shifts from working on racism to comforting white people. Whites who either feel terrible about recognizing some implicit bias or bigotry within themselves, or ashamed and overwhelmed by violent racist acts by others. Essex County Community Organization is now embarking on an interesting journey. Within the group, we have race-based learning caucuses. The White Caucus focuses on understanding our history and our role as it relates to race. Several from UUCGL are participating. The first session was Thursday night, and the next one is Tuesday, June 30th. Join us. I have helped with a similar workshop, Dismantling Race, a workshop for whites at First Church in Swampscott with a friend from ECHO. We are planning to do the same at UUCGL, but no date has been set yet. These meetings can be a bit messy, maybe make you uncomfortable, but it circles back to our principles: inherent worth and dignity of every person, compassion, equity, justice, and human relations. Here at UUCGL, we have done tremendous amount of work understanding the racism inherent in our nation's immigration policies. We've been part of a multi-faith coalition standing up to the powerful system that treats immigrants in unimaginable ways. Young children separated from parents in cages. Rules that say children locked up together cannot touch, comfort, or hug each other. The criminalization of non-white immigrants, leading to their detention in life-threatening conditions for minor infraction, such as driving without a license. Knowledge is power, and the better we understand the foundation of institutional racism in this country, the better we can participate in the work of building up communities, loving our neighbors, and working for justice. So be bold, participate, educate yourself. Let's not disappoint the legacy of Martin Luther King, who critiqued white people who preached moderation and cautioned that now is not the time. Now is the time. It is high time. I will close with the words from the Howard Thurman Center for the Common Good, challenging us to continue his anti-racist work in the mid-1900s. Do you have the guts to challenge your own thinking? In a world of locked minds, can you open yours? Our mission is to connect through shared creative experiences, exchange ideas, and explore differences. Thank you.
I think we're on. Hey, we're on. Hey,
Great.
Martha Curry. It's great to see you, and thank you so much for actually repeating um, most of the sermon that you gave in January, just this past January.
Yeah, it was it was actually kind of fun to do, and I had reread the words recently, actually for the Social Justice Ministry Team annual report.
Oh, good. Okay.
Quoted that. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, good.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. You did a lot of research and put a lot of heart into it. Also a lot of time in terms of your engagement with ECHO and with anti-racism work.
Yes, yes. It was actually a natural fit because I didn't do a lot of extra research because I was doing that work anyways. In fact, this is a little tangent, which I love to do, but I wanted to write about 1619 and anti-racism, and I kind of knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't figure out a theme. And because I couldn't figure out a theme, I couldn't write down the words. And then a week before, which is kind of late for me to write a sermon, I usually have it done, or at least a draft. A week or so before, I said, oh, I'm writing about our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Yep.
And I put that on the top and I wrote. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to have that hook.
Right.
You can have all that information and you want to share something, but then you get the hook and it's like, boom, it's just your.
Yeah, and the hook was principle one. Like.
Yes, that's great. I mean, we internalize the principles, I think, so much. It's really, it's such a light bulb moment when you go, this is really where this rubber hits the road, in this moment. So speaking of aha light bulb moments, I know that you went last night to the first of the ECHO Dismantling Racism workshops. They were doing workshops for the White Anti-Racist Caucus.
Right.
And I know you've been before to a similar training.
Yes. They had the first workshop last fall, maybe October, November timeframe, but they wanted to repeat it given everything that's happened. Right. And I can't say they wanted to do it on Zoom, but we did it on Zoom. And there was over 100 people, and it was the same info. They had kind of three big points, some of which I talked about in my sermon, but then their third point was about the history of policing and why that's such an issue now. And I didn't take very good notes, but it's policing started with getting people to capture runaway slaves. And then it moved to, once there were no slaves, there was still a big need for cheap labor, and they criminalized a lot of simple acts like crossing the street at the wrong time. And had this labor force. And the big aha for me last night was realizing when the Black people were slaves, the owners had a vested interest in taking care of them. They made this investment, in this life, but then when they were renting out criminals, they were paying by the hour, and they had no investment in treating them well or feeding them, and they just
it's so awful because it's like when a human being is your property, somehow you're more, and then when you actually have to pay these people as employees, then all bets are off, right?
Yeah, they were not paying them as employees, they were renting them from
that's right. Is this convict labor?
Yes, convict labor. Yeah, they would get arrested and then rented out. Sorry.
Right. I just want to mention, we're going to be mentioning a lot of books in the next weeks, but there was a book that blew my mind. I read it probably, I don't know how many, it doesn't matter, but it's called Worse Than Slavery. It's by David Oshinsky, and it's about the history of, it's convict labor at Parchman Farm. And I just can't recommend it highly enough. It's really disturbing, but it's also, it was just, I would say it changed my life because I had never been given that history And I think it's something that everyone needs to know. So,
Mhm.
so that was so that was the new content last night at the first of the workshops. And thank you also for being a facilitator for those
Yeah,
workshops.
yeah, I was
Yeah,
honored to be asked, and
yeah.
well, Tom Sheehan was in my group, so he
Oh, good. Oh, great. Okay, good.
could report if I did a good job.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad he was there too.
Yeah.
I wanted to highlight something that you said in your sermon,
Mhm.
your talk today, your reflections, and that we've 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 been made aware, I think, in this moment of how white people's defensiveness and conflicted feelings and like guilt or also denial or whatever, how white fragility, that's an important term, can keep these can really impede the learning and the conversations and the social transformation that needs to happen. So anyway, you said in your sermon that when you started going to ECHO meetings and conversations about anti-racism, there was a lot of focus on like personal bigotry and people grappling with that. And by the way, thank you for defining that racism isn't just bigotry, it's bigotry plus power,
Right.
prejudice plus power. So much for reverse racism. Anyway, I'm digressing. But you talked about when you first started that there was this emphasis on like my personal feelings and my being the individual white person often, and now that it's moving more towards systemic understanding systems, policies, and institutionalized racism. And you said something about people of color having to take emotional care of white people in those settings and how we just have to not expect that anymore. Can you speak to that?
Right. I learned about this, and it took me a few days to digest it and realize I got it, because I didn't get it initially, and I think and I'm not sure why, but so I was actually at an ECHO meeting where we were preparing for the anti-racist workshop that was initially scheduled in August a couple of years ago at our church,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
then the trainer couldn't do it, and it got pushed to the fall, and it was held somewhere else. And I ended up not being able to go to the workshop, but the prep that summer, we were in a group of maybe 10, and we were 12 people, and it was a mixed race group, and we were having a potluck dinner, and someone said, you know what, I don't, I don't want to be taking care of you anymore. And it was just, she's like, I want to be able to say that I am angry, and you not say, oh, no, I'm not racist, or, oh, and it was like, but I think she used that phrase, I don't want to be taking care of you anymore. I want to be able to say I'm angry and not worry about you. And I was like,
Right.
oh, whoa. But it made sense. And I think that might have been the start of ECHO, which I feel like I didn't see, but that doesn't mean it wasn't happening. Started to focus on, focus on systemic racism,
Mhm.
and that white people needed to have their own conversation. That, if we
Yeah.
wanted to work on racism, we needed to learn a lot of history and understand um, why we are where we are today. And Black people didn't need to do that education and didn't need to sit with us, and we could do it on our own.
Yes.
So hence the white anti-racism caucus, which there is also a people of color anti-racism caucus who
Right.
have a whole different agenda, as we
Right.
can imagine.
And then we meet together also with
Right,
joint,
right.
right, right. But I
Meeting.
think that's really important. The concept of emotional labor is a really, really central one to this, to all this learning, which is, if we go into spaces where we're examining all of this and white people constantly center their own feelings and experiences, it just derails the whole thing. And there is this caregiving that has to happen, which is this reassurance, like, but you're a good white person. and that hashtag not all white people or not all this. And so, yeah, I mean, we're looking at now, I think the evolution toward looking at systems and understanding that we can take care of our feelings while we do that, but we have to do that. We have to understand the systems
Right.
and the policies. So,
And,
okay.
and a white caucus can take care of other white people. So
Yeah.
you may have people throwing up their arms, but you can call them out on it or give them
Right.
support and show them the way.
Or like, we can deal with that later, or we can have a pastoral conversation later. I mean, that's the
Right.
thing too. It's a faith-based organization, Echo. And so ostensibly we are all in these congregational settings where we know about spiritual practice and meditation or prayer or just dealing with ourselves. And that's part of what prepares us, we certainly hope, to engage in a healthy way. Okay. So you got any big plans for the weekend? It's Friday. We're recording this on Friday.
No.
Good. All right. Good. Maybe just relaxing.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Gardening, I think.
Yeah. It's been an intense time for so many reasons.
Right.
So
Right.
that's
I did want to actually,
go ahead.
I wanted to add one thing is that, and I won't go into all the theory, but I'm actually hopeful that between the pandemic and the horrible death that George Floyd experienced and other people have experienced, that the work ECHO's been doing, it will continue to help support white people see the systemic racism and that we can move through it. I think it'll be bumpy and I think we have some tough times ahead of us, but
yeah, you described it as messy.
Yeah. But I'm actually hopeful. Oh, and if I can have another minute, there's a great author that I wasn't reading at the time I wrote the sermon, named Ibram X. Kendi, and I really enjoy his stuff. And he's described. So I'm just going to recommend you look into him. I have some links to videos. I saw him on Al-Bed Talk, but he talks about racism and anti-racism, and this concept of not racist doesn't play well because you're actively racist or you're actively anti-racist. So
right. In fact, I don't know if I told you this. We were talking about readings for today for this service. The readings are from Ibram X. Kendi.
Oh,
yeah.
Excellent.
So exactly, he talks about saying I'm not racist is too neutral, and we can't be neutral.
Right.
We cannot be neutral right now. There's understanding to be gained, but there's also change to be made in the institutions, and we have to be ready to participate effectively and in a strong and knowledgeable and prepared way for that. So, okay. So, and I guess I just want to say to the entire congregation, at whatever level you can engage, even if it's in conversations with your family, in conversations with your friends, in a Facebook debate. Not everybody's going to be out marching. Not everybody's going to be working at the legislative level or at the city level. We work where we can. So that's what we're going to aim to do. Thank you so much, Martha.
Thank you, Vicki.
Take care. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Healing is possible. May it be so. can happen. May it be so. And we believe what we need most are the hearts of each other right here. Liberation is possible. May it be so. Liberation is coming. May it be so. And we believe what we need most are the hearts of each other right here. And we believe what we need most are the hearts of each other right here.
Thank you for being part of this worship in spirit today, whenever you watched it. I hope that you'll join at 11 o'clock for our Zoom coffee hour. And we're going to continue to have that Zoom gathering all year throughout the summer at 11 a.m. Our next 4 Sundays, we're going to start what I'm calling Summer Sundays, which is a little bit of a simpler, more meditative, contemplative kind of offering for all of us. And the first 4 sessions will be led by Reverend Myosin Joan Amaral, the Zen Buddhist priest from the Zen Center of the North Shore. And I know that many of you know Joan and really love her, and she's a wonderful person. And one of the things I really, really appreciate and treasure about Joan is that she's very engaged with social justice, and she's very, very dedicated to spiritual practice. So it's a wonderful combination. And Greg Gallo will be our musician for the next 4 weeks. So those will be dropping at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings, as is our tradition for this time. Please let us know again if you need anything. Call the church office or call me. I will be on vacation-ish because it seems important to stay connected right now because this is such a time of crisis. What else? I just want to thank everybody who has helped keep our worship program going. We pivoted so quickly in March to online offerings, and we're going to put together a blooper reel for y'all so that you can see some of the wackiness of what it's like behind the scenes to try to do this. Oh my gosh. So thanks to everybody who participated, and again, especially to Steve DeVoe for stitching it all together and getting it ready for prime time, as it were. These words of benediction are from John Wesley, and I remember when I first used this as a benediction years ago, many of you said, "I love that. Who wrote that?" So yes, it was John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, and here is what he said. Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, for as long as ever you can. And let the people say, Amen. Go in peace, stay in touch, and stay safe.